Hi, I'm Jeremy Robinson, and this is the 19th hole. So, hi, welcome to the 19th hole, brought to you by Blal.uk. So I'm delighted today to have another guy who's been involved in professional golf for a very long time, Jonathan Loosemore. Jonathan, thanks a lot for coming on to the show today.
Hi, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
Just a quick introduction, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were obviously involved with Titleist Footjoy for a long time. You were worldwide director of tour promotions. And for how many years did you do that?
For just about 20, after playing collegiate golf in the US and a very short professional career on mostly mini tours and Q schools, it was almost 20 years. Joined the Acushnet company in 2001, and straight into the tour department, working with players on their equipment, player contracts, and everything that goes along with representing the brands at that level.
Obviously, most of or many of the great players in the world in the last couple of decades have played Titleist, including Tiger Woods. So you must have come across some famous people.
Yeah, there really aren't many that haven't played Titleist or worn Footjoy shoes at some point. So, I guess a good example was at most major championships, we would have some touch points with most players in the field. If they didn't play either a Vokey wedge or a Cameron putter or Titleist golf ball, they invariably wore Footjoy shoes. So we had contact with most players over the years. Yes.
And just, I remember when I first started playing, there was one or two tour trucks, but obviously the tour from well, not from your point of view now, but from the manufacturer's point of view, it has changed dramatically in the last 10 years, certainly 20 years.
Yeah, it really has. The level of customization that players enjoy with their equipment and just the level of service. I mean, they're spoiled, really. The manufacturers do everything for them. I mean, they don't need to travel with anything. Golf clubs tend to go on one of the club carriage services. They turn up at the golf tournament, and in their lockers they've got balls and caps and gloves for the week, new pairs of shoes if they're needed. Um, yeah, they really are spoiled, and I think you've seen over the years the trucks get bigger, get more sophisticated. Um, just as the fitting era has gone crazy with launch monitors that you didn't see in your day. It's just a different level of stuff that goes on behind the scenes, and to get these players ready to play at the highest level.
And obviously, with all that evolution of the trucks and everything, the budgets must be huge now.
Yeah, to run those trucks is expensive. Not just in terms of the hardware and the machinery that you need, but the running costs, and the people. When I started in the tour department in 2001 at Acushnet, we were literally three people, and we were dealing mostly with soft goods. And then when we had a lot more club users, we decided we needed to provide club service. So the truck became a workshop, and then you need technicians. And then when the fitting era escalated, we needed people out on the range fitting drivers and irons, and we had a putter rep, and we needed a wedge rep. And I always check in with the Titleist guys when I go to tournaments now. And at the last event, I think they had 12, 13 people on site now. It's a really big operation.
Yeah, a big operation, and obviously now Titleist, as you rightly say, they have the full range of clothing, FootJoy, shoes, clubs,
Yeah.
putters, wedges, drive. I mean, the drivers are fantastic now, and years ago, they didn't used to be the greatest, but now they're fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. No, everybody's had to work hard on the equipment side, and obviously there's been a lot in the media the last few years, which we'll talk about later on equipment and technology as that debate rumbles on. But yeah, equipment really is very, very sophisticated and high performing.
I mean, you mentioned that. I got on my list of things to do to mention the ball. The rollback of the ball, which they're going on about. Probably now is a good time to actually talk about it rather than wait.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, obviously the ball goes miles now. The quality of the ball is so good, and not only the top of the range balls, but the other balls that amateurs are using. What's your kind
yeah.
of view on one? Should it be restricted? And two, do you think it's a good thing that amateurs are not being able to use the same ball as Tiger Woods, for example?
It's a really good question, and it's a hot topic that has been around for not just 10 years, but for centuries. I mean, back when the gutta percha became the feathery, and then you looked at, different constructions of golf balls. There was clamour back in the 1930s when somebody decided to put feathers inside a leather thing instead of the solid rubber ball. So, this has always been an issue. There's always been resistance to change in golf because it's a sport with such roots in tradition. And golfers generally don't like change. Um, the distance debate's an interesting one, and I guess your listeners or viewers will think that I'm tarnished, if that's the right word, by 20 years with one of the top manufacturers. But having grown up with the game and being something of a traditionalist myself and a historian of the game, and enjoying that side of it, I think I'm able to step outside that background and look at the situation objectively. I'm also a big sports fan in other sports, and I think if you look at whether it's track and field or basketball or football or cricket, there's been so much evolution over the last 30, 40, 50 years as sports has become such big business. It's entertainment. If you look at sports in the media now, the amount of money invested and the amount of eyeballs on sports has changed massively over the last half century. And there's evolution in all sports. And I think the ball was often singled out as an easy target. It was already the most regulated piece of golf equipment, even before solid core golf balls. But there are so many factors into why players hit the ball a long way these days. I just don't think it's not just about the ball. During my time with the Kushner, I actually when this debate began to escalate, I did a series of seminars for tour players, not to spoon feed them with what to say, but we would increasingly get asked by players, what do I say to the media if they ask me about the distance debate? And my answer was always, you make your own mind up, but I can tell you what our company position would be and arm you with some facts that can help you to answer the questions. So I did a series of seminars for tour players, just providing them with facts, not opinions. And that was actually quite interesting, led to some really interesting debates with players about what they really wanted as players. But there's so many factors as to why players hit the ball further these days. Players are fitter, stronger, bigger. Fitting, as we said, fitting and customization has gone to a level where you can really maximize your ability. One that's often overlooked is agronomy, length of fairways, something as simple as that. I mean, the fairways are cut so short these days, and their golf courses are firm and bouncy and fast, and that's what the governing bodies want to see because it's a challenge to play on firm and fast fairways, right? But the total distance is a lot further, goes a lot further. If you can look at some graphs of correlations of driver head size is almost more of a factor than solid core golf balls. But the two go arm in arm. You can't. And the interesting thing about the rollback is twofold, really. It's hard to separate the balls from the clubs because it's a combination that you need to address. And if you suddenly roll back the ball, then maybe the launch and spin conditions of the driver don't work. So they're going to have to address and retool golf clubs as well, hand in hand. And I guess the other point is bifurcation, having two sets of rules, one for amateurs and one for pros. It hasn't really worked in the past. I mean, we have bifurcation in the game with different tees, golf course setups. I mean, if you and I go and play at Wentworth tomorrow, it'll be a very different golf course to the one they'll play next week at the BMW PGA. They'll dry it out, they'll firm it up for next week. They'll play the tees all the way back than where we'd probably play today. So there is inherently in the game a level of bifurcation that challenges players of different levels, right? But the one that springs to my mind is when Callaway brought the ERC driver back in the early 2000s with the trampoline effect on the face. It wasn't allowed to be used at the professional level. And in the marketplace, nobody bought it because the average handicap golfer, the amateur golfer, they wanted to use the same equipment as the professionals.
Yeah.
So bifurcation doesn't really work. And I think if there's a rollback of the ball and there's a tour ball, handicap golfers are going to want to play that same ball to test themselves against the best players,
I
to
couldn't
measure
agree more.
themselves.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's a very valid point you make about the fairways. The courses are firmer, less water, the environmental side of it. You know, and there's tees and there's handicapping golf, which is a great leveler, so everybody
Yeah.
can against each other. But I do honestly believe that your average golfer, my mates who I play with on a Friday afternoon sometimes, they would want to use the same ball that Scotty Scheffler's using.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I
And
just
and they
want to do
and they
it.
don't and they don't want to hit it any shorter. There's nobody at your golf club saying, "Oh, this game's too easy," right? I mean, the governing bodies are talking about changing the rules of the game for what is a fraction of 1% of the golfing population, the tour professional. And I think historically golf has had one set of rules, and I think that's so central to the histories and traditions of the game that would be a shame to see a degree of bifurcation now.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think if they start doing that, they're going to make a big mistake. I think plenty of other rules in golf need looking at and possibly changing. You know,
Yeah,
whether they've made the right decision with the long putter, etc. But I don't really think they need to have one
yeah,
golf ball for a pro and one for an amateur. I mean, where
yeah,
do you draw the line as well? I mean, watching the Walker Cup last week, which was a great event at St Andrews, what kind of ball would they be using?
yeah, yeah.
Where would you draw the line? I mean, would you draw the line at county matches or junior golf, senior golf? I just think it would be such a mess if
Yeah.
you do it.
And I mean, I think there's an art to driving the ball a long way, and if the
Hmm.
further you hit it, the harder it is to keep it in the fairway too. So credit to the longer hitters in the game if they want to take golf courses on and try and hit it 330 yards. Their landing area, their target is a lot narrower.
Hmm.
But any kind of rollback is going to favour the long hitters even more. If you take, say, 10% away from the total distance, a guy that drives the ball 330 yards, he's now going to drive it, what's that, 297 yards. The guy who drives it 260, he's now going to drive it 234.
Yeah.
So he can't reach the par fives. The 330 yard hitter is still hitting it 300 yards and can still hit that par five in two. It's almost like the gap's going to get bigger.
I agree. I mean, to me, it just doesn't make sense. But hopefully, it won't happen, and I don't think it will. And that was the reason I thought that the Open Championship was so good because it was a great thing. It showed that you didn't have to be a bomber to win a tournament, win a
And
major.
I didn't see that anywhere in the media. Every time you see DJ or Kepka win, be it on Live Now or when Kepka wins, they talk about how far he hit it and how he overpowered the golf course. I'm not sure I saw a single media report, and Brian Harman won at Hoylake, that this was the guy that was 150th in driving distance out of 156 players that week,
Yeah.
and he won by six. I mean,
Well, and the
it's
other
just
thing
not
I
talked
thought,
about.
yeah, the other thing I thought, one or two people said it was a little bit of a boring Open, but it was only a boring Open because he absolutely demolished the field.
Yeah,
And he did. He played better golf from tee to green, and that was
yeah,
it. And that's why it possibly was a bit boring because he won so easily.
yeah, yeah. No, it's hard to remember a more dominant major win in
Yeah,
recent times, but
yeah,
it was really impressive because
it
of the
was.
way he plotted his way around the course, and it was just proof that you don't have to overpower a golf course to win an event by six.
No, that's the point I'm making. So the rollback and length is obviously makes a big factor to the game of golf, but it's not everything. And anyway, it's one of those things. We'll wait and see what happens with it. But
But
I
but if
think,
you look at all sports, I can remember watching NBA basketball back when I was in college, which is what 30 years ago now, and maybe the center could dunk a basketball. Now I think everybody on the team can dunk a basketball. Training changes and players find ways to train differently, plyometrics to make them jump higher. There's evolution. That's why the track records keep getting broken. I mean, they're running the mile almost a minute faster now than they were back in the 40s and 50s. Athletes evolve, and let's face it, if you look at the longest hitters in the game these days, if you stand Brooks, Dustin Johnson, and Bryson alongside the greats from another generation, Trevino, Player, even Nicholas, one trio is a lot taller and bigger and stronger. It's no question that they're going to hit it further. Yeah, they might be allowed to do that by technology, but it's just a different set of challenges.
I agree, and I'd say the evolution of all sports. I mean, one that you can really, in my opinion, compare a little bit to golf is cricket and the T20 and the distances they hit the
Yeah,
ball now. The sixes they hit are just unbelievable.
yeah,
Far they hit it, and obviously the bats are different and they're a lot stronger and a lot bigger, as you rightly say.
yeah,
So
yeah.
But anyway, so that's quite an interesting one. So we went back a little bit there. So having kind of finished at Acushnet, Titleist Footjoy, you then started at JGL Sports. So just tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about
Well, JDL is my initials, so I named the company after myself.
that. Yeah.
Quite simply. Do you know? I think having done contracts for so many years from the Titleist and Footjoy side of the table, um, I sort of knew how all sides of the relationship worked. I knew from an equipment contract or any kind of contract what the player needed, what the brand needed, and how that whole mediation process worked. And it was always an area I was interested in. And I sort of had half a mind to, you've been at a company almost 20 years. It's the industry leader. I was in my mid 40s at the time, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do post Acushnet? Because unlikely you're going to stay there for your whole career. So I had in the back of my mind to do something different, something like this. And then when I left Acushnet a couple of years ago, set up on my own to look at managing players, to look at consulting for companies with an interest in golf. I'm from the north of England originally, Yorkshireman like yourself, I believe.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Relocated to Scandinavia, and I've lived in Norway since 2006. And I think there's a real opportunity here in the Nordic region where it's maybe not as ingrained in the culture to use golf for business purposes as it might be in the US or the UK. And with Viktor Hovland being in the news so much in the Nordic region at the moment, participation in golf is increasing, general interest in golf is increasing. And I'm trying to get to the right people in Norwegian businesses to try and persuade them to invest some of their marketing and advertising monies in the game, to entertain their customers and clients, most of which are or have become or are becoming golfers. So yeah, JDL Sports is its focus really is managing players, because that was one of my biggest passions at Acushnet, was helping the young players on the way. Following them through the junior game, amateur game, something that Acushnet did so well and still does so well through collegiate and through the first years of professional. And that's an area where I had a lot of experience and passion in. So, trying to align myself now with the right kind of players, both established and up and coming players, help them on the way, help them on the commercial side, help them evaluate the performance piece around them, see if that's working, and just help them plan their careers, really. So it's sort of just coming at it from a different angle than where I did during my Acushnet career.
Obviously, as you mentioned, with Hovland being, a great golfer, but he seems a really good guy as well, and he seems very grounded,
Yeah.
intelligent. He's clearly good for the game. Do you think he's going
Yeah.
to make a big difference in your part of the world with him
Well,
being?
I think he already is, because you're already seeing, Norway's a country that loves to cheer for its own and wave the flags, and that's historically been in a team arena, be it the Winter Olympics where they're historically so very strong, or team games. Handball is a massive sport in Norway, and local football teams get well supported. It hasn't been as popular to cheer for individuals, but with Viktor Hovland in golf, Casper Ruud in tennis,
Yeah,
the track and field athletes like Karsten Warholm, the hurdler, the Ingebrigtsen boys on the track, middle distance runners, Erling Haaland in football. There are some fabulous world class individual athletes from Norway now that the country's really getting behind, and I think Victor has come along at a time where golf is booming. We saw participation rates in Norway increase by 20% during COVID, and they've been maintained now 2 to 3 years on. So there's a general interest. Him winning the FedEx Cup was huge news here. The hype coming towards the Ryder Cup next month is growing, and he's obviously going to be a very big part of that team. So yeah, it's exciting times for Norwegian golf. You're certainly seeing increased participation at the junior level too. So hopefully there's a new generation of world class players coming through.
he seems like the kind of person who would relate to, or the juniors would see as a role model. But he clearly likes going back to Norway, and he just seems a good guy, really. And he's fun to watch playing golf as well, because he doesn't hold back
Yeah,
on that long hitting.
no,
He
no,
does
he doesn't.
hit.
He's very aggressive on the golf course, isn't he? And you're right. Although he's made his home in the US and he sounds almost more American than he does Norwegian when you see him interviewed, but he's very, very good at coming back to Norway for a couple of
Yeah.
weeks around the time of the Scottish Open and the Open, I know he hosts a couple of junior events to promote junior golf back home in Oslo. He's involved in some other events throughout the year when he does pop home to Norway. So yeah, he's pretty good at giving back. He's certainly a very, very good ambassador for the game in this area.
As a role model to young people, he's pretty good, really, isn't he? I mean, there's
Yeah.
not a lot going wrong with him.
No, absolutely. The way he conducts himself on the course too, everything about him.
Yeah, he always seems to have a smile on his face, and he doesn't, he's not a Mr. Grumpy or anything. I like watching him. I think he's great for the game of golf, and he's a fun guy to watch play.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving on to the Ryder Cup, really, we're coming into a bit of a season of team events. Talking about individuals, it seems like team event season for the golf. Obviously, the Walker Cup was last week, and I watched quite a lot on TV, and I enjoyed watching it. It was a shame with the result, but clearly the Americans, as they always do, they had a very, very strong team. But as on the TV and a spectacle, I mean, the weather was lovely as well. It looked great. St Andrews, the whole thing was fantastic.
Yeah, I was at St Andrews a week ago for the Asian Tour event.
I missed you there, because I was there as well. So.
Yeah, no, I look after a young player from Australia called Jack Thompson, who won the Q School in Asia this year. So he was at the St Andrews Bay Championship. So I was there for a few days and took a little trip down to the old course and saw how it was being prepared. Yeah, it's just such a great venue for golf, isn't it? It really is. But yeah, the Americans always strong with the Walker Cup. Their Walker Cup record speaks for itself. And although GB and I got off to a quick start, I was half expecting the Americans to come back strongly on Sunday.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was a shame because they did so well on day one, but as you rightly say, they've got a lot of strength in depth. I mean, just on the numbers, the amount of people who play college golf, etc.
Yeah.
You know about college golf, I do, and I know about how strong they are in the Cup. So, but it was a great event, and hopefully it'll carry on building. And it'll be interesting to see who the new captain is for GB and the next one. The talk of they're moving on to getting a professional, more of a name to be the captain. And McGinley's name's been mentioned, etc. The next one's at Cypress Point, and then Lahinch. So, and if they go down the road of a McGinley or a Harrington or a Monty, I think it'd be great for the Walker Cup. I think it would elevate it.
I think it would. And you look at the number of Walker Cup players that have gone on to be Ryder Cup captains, Luke being one. And like you say, Harrington and McGinley and others before them. I mean, why not? Because team golf is team golf, isn't it? And there's obviously a passion from those players to sort of give something back and support the younger players. So why not? I think that'd be a good idea.
Yeah, no, I think it would. So that was a Walker Cup, and the next team event we've got Solheim Cup coming up.
Yeah,
which again should be a great event, and the European. The standard of European ladies tour golf or the ladies golf it has increased unbelievably, really, in the last decade, hasn't it?
You'd almost expect the Europeans to be favourites of the Solheim Cup, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
and that's getting a lot of press in my world with Suzanne Petterson as the captain and Carolina Martins as the vice captain. So, it's that'll be exciting to see. Finca Courtesin is quite a place too. That's very American style golf course. But I think the European team will be strong. They've got some really, really good players. I watched Lynn Grant play a little bit, and she's very, very impressive.
But don't you think that the kind of boost on or the boom in European golf for standard of the ladies really has been driven by the Scandinavians, hasn't it?
Well, it has. It has. The strength of the Scandinavians in women's golf is, back to Annika Sorenstam, I guess, 25 years ago. There's been a progression of strong Swedish players. Suzanne Petterson inspired some good Norwegian players. I've got a Norwegian female player that plays the LET, Michelle Forsland, who's playing LET and LET Access, and she's of that era that will have been inspired by Petterson. It's Norwegian Nordic women's golf is historically very strong, isn't it? The Finns have got some good players. The Danish girl won on Sunday, the Irish Open in a playoff. Historically very strong. Yeah,
so it'll be good that the week before the Ryder Cup, and they've actually got 2 Solheim Cups, haven't they, in the next 2 years?
So yes, that's right.
Moving it. So Suzanne Pettersson's the captain for the next 2023 and 2024. Yeah, they're doing that with the Walker Cup. I think they're playing back to back in 25 and 26. Doing that.
Yeah. To get it alternate years from the Ryder Cup.
The Ryder Cup, yeah, which makes sense, but I don't think it's a bad thing having. I think it's quite good So we were talking
Mm,
about individual sports, a bit of team golf now, Walker Cup, Solheim Cup, Ryder Cup, all within about a month of each other.
yeah,
I think it's not, but I quite like it really when it's like,
great to watching it. Team golf, it really is.
right. So moving on to what some people would call the main event of the team events,
Yeah.
the Ryder Cup. So obviously both teams are confirmed now. If we start with the American team,
Mm,
they've obviously got a very, very strong team. They've built their team around Jupiter, Florida. But anyway, that's.
yeah.
But
But they have.
what did you think of the picks there? I mean, obviously Kepka had to be picked.
Yeah, well, I think, Ryder Cup proves that experience is important in it. I think you've got to have an experienced spine of the team, players that have been there before, because it's a cauldron like no other. You can play major championships, even going down the stretch, but that Ryder Cup forum is something completely different. What I think is interesting is that three of the qualifiers on the US team are rookies.
Mm.
So although the US team is really strong, and although, in Clark and Brian Harman and Max Homer, who's turned himself into a top 10 player of the world, but they're still rookies. They've never been in a Ryder Cup before. And I think I'm right in saying Clark's certainly never been at a President's Cup. Homer has, and Harman might have been, I think.
Not
But
sure.
yeah, when you got three rookies qualifying, you got some experience there. Cantley, Schauffele, and Scheffler were the other three qualifiers, but they've only played one Ryder Cup each. The last one where they won at Whistling Straits. So there's not a lot of experience there. So I think Zach had to go with experience on his picks. Kepka he had to pick. I mean, he's clearly with his major win this year and the way he's performed, he had to be on the side. Spieth, Morikawa, Fowler have all had decent years and have all got Ryder Cup experience. Justin Thomas was the controversial one, wasn't it? But I think the Europeans proved for years with giving Poulter a pick 4 times when he hadn't qualified on points. It's the intangibles in the Ryder Cup. It's that team chemistry. Who can you pair them with? What do they bring to the team room behind the scenes? And there's no question that Justin's such a likable guy, and you compare him with absolutely anybody. I mean, that wasn't a surprise to me. And the other pick was Sam Burns, which, he won the match play this year. He hasn't played great since April or May, but could have really picked anybody in that last spot. Could have picked Finau or, I think the Europeans seem to have more of a habit of picking on current form. And I think if you're picking on current form, you'd have picked Lucas Glover, who's had an unbelievable July and August and has President's Cup experience, although he would have been a Ryder Cup rookie too. But yeah, it's a strong team. They got 4 rookies, the same as Europe does, but they've got some good team experience. I think that President's Cup, although it doesn't have the glamour yet of the history of the Ryder Cup, and maybe never will, it does give the Americans some team golf experience, doesn't it?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I think the team. I mean, they obviously won easily at Whistling Straits, and the President's Cup. It was a good one. The last President's Cup. It didn't look like it was going to be. It was good. I think they do that, but I mean, I think DeChambeau, has LIV influenced the picking of not picking DeChambeau and possibly DJ? I mean, a guy who shoots 61.58 to win a tournament. I mean, I don't care what anybody says, whether it's LIV or whether it's me or you playing down the monthly medal. 61.58, 2 rounds, plus he's a major champion. I think he's been very unlucky. I think Sam Burns, in my opinion, has been lucky to be picked above DeChambeau. Whether it's got anything to do with LIV, who knows?
Yeah, it could be, and I'm sure there's politics involved somewhere. Zach couldn't really win, could he? Because if he picked the LIV guys, he was going to be criticised by half the world, and if he didn't pick them, he was going to be criticised by the other half. So he was in a complete no-win situation. DeChambeau he's such a talented golfer. I watched him at, was it Royal Lytham when he played Walker Cup?
Yeah.
But he's such a divisive character, and I think you and I know what it's like behind the scenes, that the way players talk and that whole camaraderie is so important at a team event. And I'm just not sure. I don't know him well enough, so don't want to feel like I'm speaking out of turn, but he seems like a very divisive character. And maybe Zach thought he would be limited in who he could pair him with. What would he bring to the team room? I don't know. So I guess the the biggest surprise for me was Dustin Johnson being left out, who might lead us on to a LIV conversation when we're done with talking about Ryder Cup. But he won all 5 matches at Whistling Straits. He was number one in the world for 2 years until he stopped turning ranking points on when he went to LIV. I mean, he's almost a bigger miss from that list of picks than DeChambeau for me.
I would agree with you. I think it goes back to what you said. I think Zach Johnson was in a position, an enviable position in a way on the picks. He couldn't win or he couldn't lose, as you rightly say.
Yeah.
And if Koepka had played his way in, I think he might have picked Dustin Johnson.
Yeah.
I don't think he wanted to pick 2 LIV players.
Yeah, you could be right.
That was the thing. I think if he picked 2 LIV players, it would have smacked a little bit on the PGA Tour. So, but we never know.
Yeah.
They've got a very strong team. I mean, you could argue Keegan Bradley was unlucky to miss out.
Yeah.
He obviously feels he was from what he's put on social media. DeChambeau, Dustin Johnson, Cameron Young was another one possibly who could have been in the frame. But again, they've got a very strong team, and we'll wait and see. But going on to the Europeans, it pretty much picked itself. But saying that, 6 months ago, it would have looked a completely different team, wouldn't it? I mean, it's unbelievable where this guy's come from.
Yeah, no, it would. I mean, when you look down the points list, it's amazing how much more depth the Americans have. I mean, I did this exercise yesterday when, I guessed we'd probably talk about the Ryder Cup. If you go down the list of the official World Golf Rankings, which I know doesn't include LIV players in perhaps their rightful place at the moment, but I mean, you have to pick all the Europeans in the top 50 or 60 in the world, but the Americans, you've got a lot of choices. There's just more strength in depth in American golf. But I think if you match up the top 6 Europeans with the top 6 Americans, you've got a pretty close match.
Oh yeah,
and I think 7 through 9 against 7 through 9 is quite tight, and then maybe the Americans have the edge. I don't know. Home course advantage.
Where do you place Aberg in that list of where do you put him like a person who could be with the Hovlands and the Rahms and that as one of the key players, or do you put him down the bottom as someone who might not play very much?
I mean, Ludvig is he's coached by Peter Hansen, who played the Ryder Cup twice, who obviously, he's been a top 10 player in the world himself. He's turned to coaching now. He coaches Ludvig and he coaches one of my other guys, Jens Dantorp, who's having a good year. But so I met Ludvig at the Dubai Desert Classic when he played on an invite, and he's a really, really impressive young man. Physically with the golf club in his hand, he's magnificent. I mean, there's no question that he's got more Ryder Cups in his future. You would not be surprised if he became a major winner and established himself as a top 10 player in the world. He's also a very impressive young guy too. He looks you in the eye when he talks to you, and he's personable, and he's a lovely kid. But I get why he was picked. Winning in Switzerland, I get why Luke picked him, but I just feel he was playing in college at Texas Tech 3 months ago, and he's played 9 events since he's turned professional. Yes, he played a lot of events as an amateur that he got invites to before that, but I don't know. I just feel like there's no substitute for Ryder Cup experience. And personally, although there was pressure to pick him, I don't think I would have picked him. I think I would have invited him along to be a part of the team room because he's definitely going to play future Ryder Cups, but he hasn't even played a major championship. And to suddenly throw him in a Ryder Cup is incredible, really. I hope he does well. And whether he does well or not, this is not going to make or break his career because he's clearly going to have a very good career ahead of him. But just feel it's throwing him into the lion's den.
That's the one thing I wrote down. I mean, I put a note here. He's the first player, and he'll probably be the only player in the history of the game to play in a Ryder Cup before he's played in a major.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable. Yeah. Most of the top amateurs have either qualified for a major before or been invited to play because they've won the amateur championship, etc., etc. But to play in the Ryder Cup before you play in a major is unthinkable, really.
I was trying to think of a parallel, and the closest one I could get was in 2013, and I can remember there being a big clamour in the media over this one. Jordan Spieth had turned pro beginning of 2013, and he'd played the whole season on the PGA Tour and earned his card, and he won John Deere in July. and he got a pick for the President's Cup. He didn't qualify. Fred Couples picked him, and there was a lot of talk in the media to pick a rookie that very little experience. But he'd been a pro for 9 months and he played a full PGA Tour season. I mean, Ludvig played NCAAs in June, and so it's just I don't want to sound like I'm doing Ludvig a disservice because he's a wonderful player, and I'm sure he'll do great, and I hope he does great. But just feel that I don't know. It's a top. I don't think I would have picked him.
It's going to be very, very interesting to see how he does. I personally would have had him as the first choice pick. I think the way he's played, when he had to play well in Czech and Switzerland, beg your pardon, I just think it's unbelievable. I know, and I take your point that he was playing NCAAs literally yesterday, wasn't he? And still playing at Texas Tech. But I just thought what he's done the last 2 weeks, I think you just got to give him a go.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
You know, I don't think it'll finish him. If he has a bad Ryder Cup, I don't think it'll make, if Europe get bashed and he plays badly, he'll get.
It's not going to finish him. And I think Luke is astute enough as a captain to know that he's going to need a little bit of protecting, give him the right partners, probably just play him once a day for singles. Who knows? Luke's a really smart guy and he's a deep thinker, and I think he'll have thought this through and he'll have had an eye on his pairings, and I'm sure he'll be fine. It'll certainly be exciting to watch.
Oh yeah, it will be very exciting. I mean, I think the whole thing. Then the other one, who was I thought personally that Adrian Meronk has been very, very unlucky. Højgaard,
Yeah,
great players. He's a great player, and both of them are great players. These twins, but you look at the stats. Meronk is third on the DP World Tour Order of Merit this year. I know the Ryder Cup is more than a year, but to me, it's a bit of a smack in the face to the European Tour. Third, he's ahead of him by how many spots? He's ahead of him by 20 spots in the world rankings.
Yeah,
and to over,
he's won 3 times in the last 14 months, twice since the qualifying began, and he won at Marco Simone in Rome. I mean that's what all the golf media is talking about today, is that Meronk was left out, and the one pick that is being picked out as the culprit here is Shane Lowry, which I think is a little bit unfair when Luke's got to go with some experience. He's only got Bob McIntyre qualified, but if you look at who he had to pick from, he didn't have a lot of players to pick from with experience.
No.
So he was always going to have to pick probably 3 rookies. Straka picked himself top 25 in the world. You've got to pick Straka. But the others were tricky. And I think Adrian's really unlucky to miss out. I wonder how much weight Luke put on that Hero Cup that they played in January, because I looked back at the scores yesterday evening and Meronk lost all his matches at the Hero Cup. And Nick and Højgaard won all of his. So
could well have had because I noticed yesterday, I didn't really watch much, but I did watch bits of the press conference. And Donald mentioned about Straka going to play in that, how he flew from Hawaii to play in it. Now he was so impressed with it. So maybe what you're saying is right. Maybe that Hero Cup, for some reason, had a bit of a bearing on it.
Yeah, there's no question Adrian's really unlucky to miss out. It would have been great to have a Polish player for the first time in the Ryder Cup. Might have done a lot for development of the game in that part of the world.
That's the other point I was going to make, going back to the how golf's doing so well in Norway, etc. I know it's not the end. I know it shouldn't be done like that, but golf in Poland, surely it would have made a massive difference.
It would. I just wonder, though, I don't know enough about golf in Poland, but is there the culture like there is in Britain and France and Spain and some other countries to play match play as juniors? I don't know how much match play experience does Adrian have. Does that have a bearing on it? I don't know.
Yeah, I just think it's a bit of a shame for if there's a Polish billionaire out there who's looking to maybe get involved in junior golf in Poland or a challenge or event or something, and he sees that, he's going to think, I can't be bothered with this.
Yeah, he can count himself really unlucky. The other one I felt sorry for is Rasmus Højgaard, twin brother, who's won 4 times on the DP World Tour to his brothers 2. And yes, Nikolai was higher than him in the point standing, but pick a twin without the other.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. That's why I was surprised at that one. I know Lowry's obviously not shown the form, but you couldn't have left Lowry out, in my opinion. It wasn't.
No, I think
it had a bad
year. For me, Fleetwood, Lowry, Rose, and Straka were certainties for me, and the other two who were invariably going to be rookies were the question marks for me. I had half a mind if I was doing it, and it would have been controversial and it would have been headlines in the paper to say, what about Harrington? He's played
Well,
unbelievable golf on the Champions Tour this year, and he's played well in the majors when he's played them. And you're lacking experience in this team. If you look at the 6 qualifiers, or of everybody that's played, you've got McIlroy that's played 6 Ryder Cups, Rose has played 5. Nobody else has played more than 2. There's very little Ryder Cup experience on either of these teams.
you could have put Harrington in. You could have put Harrington in instead of Shane Lowry, to be honest. You just
You
said, right,
could,
because he's a 3-time major winner, and the thing with Harrington is, it's not like he struggles for length, going back to length. He hits the ball as
yeah,
far as most of them now, doesn't he?
he does. He
You know,
does.
so he wouldn't be
Whether
overpowered.
whether picking a Ryder Cup captain, somebody who's been a captain before, would have created. I don't know. He would have been he wouldn't have been a bad pick, would he? He
No,
certainly wouldn't let anybody down.
I don't think any of these players. Well, I'm sure Shane Lowry will, do everything in his
Yeah,
capability because he was so passionate about the Ryder Cup,
yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
he?
There's no question. Seamus Power would have been in if he'd have been picking 6 months ago. He was playing
Well,
really well on the PGA Tour, wasn't he?
yeah, exactly. I mean, he was top of the FedEx list up until the spring.
Yeah.
So, but it's they both got great teams. The course seemed pretty decent. Whether it's the greatest golf course in the world, I don't know. But I don't think for the
Mm.
Ryder Cup it makes any difference because you say the atmosphere is electric.
Yeah, I don't think the course. I think a good course will help the Ryder Cup, but I don't think a poorer course would really hurt it. I know from the players I've known that have played the Italian Open that it's not the players' favourite.
Yeah,
I know it's been going through a big, quick development transition into getting it ready for the Ryder Cup over 2 or 3 years, and they played the Italian Open now during this phase. So I'm sure in 3 weeks' time it will be a lot more mature and it will be better than it's been for the Italian Opens, and it'll look completely different with the grandstands and the people and everything else. So I'm sure it'll be a good venue, and Italy's a sports mad nation and Rome's a sports crazy city, so I'm sure it'll be great. Um, but I mean, the golf course is always kind of secondary, isn't it, to the Ryder
yeah,
Cup?
absolutely. I mean, some of the golf courses that they use these days, because of the money and everything involved and the everything else that goes on around it, they don't use the greatest courses. I mean, if you had it
No,
in Britain, you'd play it at Royal County Down or somewhere like that, but they're never going
yeah,
to play the Ryder Cup there, you know.
no, no. It's not about the golf course, is it? It's about the business reasons behind choosing the golf course.
Exactly. But it will be a great Ryder Cup, two great teams. So putting you on
Yeah.
the spot, what do you think? Who's going to win?
Well, the Americans haven't won outside the US since 1993, right? They haven't won an away one for 30 years now. 4 rookies on each team, equally inexperienced teams, or I think Europe might win this one.
Hmm. I
I
agree
think
with you. I agree with
I
you
think
on
on paper the Americans are stronger, and the bookies will
that.
no doubt have America as the favourites. But I think the Europeans want this one because they got absolutely stuffed 2 years ago. I just think
I
they'll
mean,
want this one really badly.
it's a similar kind of thing when they went to Paris National, isn't it? They got beaten in America. The Americans had a unbelievable team on paper, but in the end of the day, the Europeans absolutely bashed them, didn't they? At Paris
Yeah,
National.
they
Oh,
did.
set up brilliantly. Talking about the course, it was set up the
Yeah,
Europeans. Just
yeah.
just on the picks. One more last one, because then we'll just move on to live a bit and get your thoughts on it. But what if obviously the main difference in the two teams was the Europeans were not allowed to pick live players, where the
Mm.
Americans were allowed to pick live players. If the Europeans had picked to live were allowed to pick live players, would you have picked Sergio Garcia ahead of Højgaard and Maronk, or Aberg, as you like to say? Would you have put him in the team?
I think you have to pick on recent form. As I said earlier, I think that's something the Europeans have always done better. I mean, clearly Sam Burns was a pick based on what he did until April or May and not through June, July, August.
Yeah,
Whereas Luke even said himself he's picked on current form, and Højgaard and Ludvig Aberg has played really well the last few weeks. So, I mean, who would you have picked? Garcia's form has been terrible. he hasn't played particularly well on LIV, and he hasn't played very well on. He was at St Andrews last week for the Asian Tour event and missed the cut. He hasn't played very well. He's somebody, I think LIV players, to sort of take one step into that discussion already, I think LIV players seem to fall into one or two categories. There seems like some that are still working really hard at the games to be as good as they can be, and there are some that are there because it's 3-round tournaments 14 times a year and they make lots of money. And I love Sergio. He was a Titleist player back in the day, and I've known him for many years. But I just feel like he's in that freewheeler category. I feel like he's not really competitive. Hasn't played very well at the majors this year. I'm not sure who you couldn't justify a pick for Sergio, and Lee Westwood, Ian Poulter.
No,
haven't really played very well on LIV either. I'm not sure which LIV players you would have picked. It was a much harder job for Zach there with Brooks and Dustin and Bryson.
Yeah, because I mean, Garcia is the only one you could have picked, and possibly what you're saying is correct. And maybe if they'd had the carrot of being able to play in the Ryder Cup, maybe they might have made a difference to the way they played. I mean, you're right, he missed the cut at Fairmont in the Asian Tour event. He shot 5 over par the first day, didn't he?
He did. And I, like I said, I was there, and on the Thursday morning, he came out of the locker room like 20 minutes before his tee time and went and hit a few balls. He looked like you or I would before a round. It didn't look like he was getting ready to play a tournament round. So
I mean, his caddy had a carry bag, didn't he, and stuff. And I saw the same thing. So, but I just feel that if you'd got him in the Ryder Cup and it came down to the singles and you had him out at 9, 10 or 11 at the bottom, talking about experience, I just think he could be the man because he's such a brilliant golfer. And I know he hasn't played as well, and what you say is rightly correct. But, his Ryder Cup record is obviously second to none. It speaks for itself. Yeah. And I just think he's such a brilliant golfer. I think he's the one player from LIV that could have been me, and I could have done. I would have picked him. I know what you're saying. He hasn't done well, but
he's also been quite. Seems like he's been quite abrasive and outspoken against his former colleagues that stayed with the PGA Tour. So I don't know how much tension that might have created amongst the team, and I don't think you can risk that at Ryder Cup.
Yeah, possibly not. But I mean, they couldn't pick him anyway, so we could go on talking about it all day. It's never.
No, that's true.
So just moving on to the last kind of topic, it is LIV. I mean, when it started, it was obviously a bit of a shock. That first one at Centurion came out of nowhere, and now it's starting to establish itself. And obviously, there's the big question of whether there's going to be a merger between the PGA Tour, DP World Tour, and the PIF at the moment.
Yeah.
Including Jay Minor and Keith Pelly, seem to have gone on summer holidays. It's all gone very, very quiet.
Well, I can't see there ever being full cooperation or a merger. And I think the announcement in June of a cooperation, or what the press reported as a merger, appears to have been to stop the two-way litigation. LIV suing the PGA Tour and PGA Tour suing LIV. I think they both agreed that let's not spend tens of millions dragging each other through the courts. Let's just agree to disagree and do our own thing. And the media started to speculate that LIV would probably be swallowed up by the PGA Tour and its special events. But I think there are two issues here. That Yasser, the man behind the Public Investment Fund in Saudi, LIV is his baby. It was his idea, and he loves it. And he's the one with the purse strings here. And let's face it, that's going to win at the end of the day. I don't see LIV going away at all. No. The other issue is I'm not sure how many LIV players want to go back and play the PGA Tour. They all seem quite happy to me. And likewise, there's probably more PGA Tour players that would like the comfort of playing LIV than there are LIV players that would want to go back and play the PGA Tour.
I can't see that many PGA Tour players. Certainly the likes of Dustin Johnson, Brooks Koepka, especially if they sort out vaguely the world rankings and they can keep playing in the majors.
Yeah.
Dustin Johnson, Brooks Koepka would no way go back to the PGA Tour, I don't think.
No. I mean, some players have even said that in the media, haven't they? That there aren't any LIV players wanting to go back and play the PGA Tour. So I think we're going to see, which is fine. It will just become a separate tour and they will exist side by side. It will be interesting to see how many players that are eligible for LIV's Q School this year, which hasn't been in the media very much, how many will take up those spots, how many will actually go and try and qualify, and if that will be used against them by the PGA Tour or the DP World Tour. I think when LIV came about, I'm all for players being independent contractors and freedom of where they play. And, as Lee Westwood was quite outspoken, and I agree completely with Lee that, for years, European Tour players went to play the PGA Tour, or they went to play some Asian Tour events, and there was freedom of movement, provided they fulfilled their membership regulations and requirements for their home tour. They were free to go and play wherever they want. And that changed with LIV, and I think that was a little bit of a shame. The one way I started to see where LIV had a negative effect was the world rankings issue, where clearly the world rankings are not representative of the best players in the world. Cameron Smith is one of those players who has clearly kept his game in good shape, kept himself in good shape, and continues to be world class. There's no question he should be a top 10, top 15 player in the world. But when Jack Thompson, the young Australian that I look after, trying to get him starts on the Asian Tour earlier in the season, all the invite spots were taken up by LIV players trying to earn world ranking points. So when I started to see that opportunities for young players at the start of their careers were being limited by LIV players who needed world ranking points, then I started to see, okay, the close relationship between LIV and the Asian Tour was starting to have an effect on young Asian Tour players that were at the beginning of their careers. And I didn't think that was very positive for the game.
I mean, yeah, you can see that. I mean, I think the Asian Tour, we tried to get a couple of players into. We got one into Fairmont on an invite in the end, but the Asian Tour were quite open, saying, we're not really going to give any invites. Not like they did at Slaley Hall. We're going to try and make sure that the people who get their cards through the Asian Tour School get in as many events as possible.
Yeah,
which is, it's a good thing. I can see what you're saying. But clearly, the international series events, for example, Fairmont and Close House, being funded by the PIF.
Yeah.
Or majority.
And the winner of that international series mini order of merit will progress to LIV next year at the expense of somebody dropping out. So
yeah. You can see, but I can understand what you're saying. It's possibly doing that. But I mean, from my point of view, I think LIV, I think you're exactly right. I don't think there will be any kind of merger. I mean, they can go on saying what they want, but at the end of the day, the interesting thing is if we sat here in a year's time, whether these big events on the PGA Tour, whether the PGA Tour can carry on afford to be paying out all this money. Clearly, and I mean, they're trying to buy Salah for 150 million, 200 million, so a few hundred million here.
Yeah. And the money that the PIF and the Saudis are putting into football makes the money that they put into LIV, that was the clamour of the golf media, pales into insignificance, doesn't it? I mean,
but whether the PGA Tour can carry on paying these estimated prize funds and all the other stuff they're paying out will be interesting to see in a year's time. And if they start not degrading, but bringing the prize funds down, players, one or two of them, as you rightly say, might think, I'm going to go to LIV. And I think the other interesting players, and there aren't that many at the moment, but one or two of the ones who are outside of the top 50 and won't get into those big events, are they going to start thinking, well, I might go to LIV and play for this kind of money?
Yeah, they might well do that. They might well do that. What's going to be interesting is the players that get relegated from LIV.
Yeah.
So where are they going to go? Are they going to be welcome back to the PGA Tour? We said that not many LIV players want to go back, but what about the ones that have to go back? The ones that lose their spot on LIV, are they going to be welcome back with open arms? You would think so, but I'm not so sure.
I don't know. I mean, if they have a merger, you'd have to think there would be, but then they're going on about, some of the other players on the PGA Tour won't be given more money for being loyal to the PGA Tour. And I just think you're right in what you say, in that people who play on the LIV, they're happy to do that, and I think there's a place for these different tours. I mean, it gives. They go about it in a slightly different way, and whether it's right or whether it's wrong, it elevates the majors. There's no doubt about that. The majors now become, the Masters might not like it, but they're never going to start banning players, are they?
No, they're not. They're not. You're right. And you mentioned cricket earlier when we talked about technology, but a Test cricket fan didn't like 2020 when it turned up, and just like the traditional golf fan doesn't like LIV when it turned up. But it'll be very interesting to see how LIV evolves, because I don't think they've got the format right. I think the small fields, the shotgun start, the 3 rounds, there's so much of it that the product, in my opinion, isn't good enough.
No.
Of the 48 players they've got, there's maybe 10, 15, maximum 20 on any given week that can contend. The coverage, which I watched in almost every event, I've watched some of on the TV. I think it's confusing, the shotgun start. I don't think they got the leaderboard right. I think it's hard to understand. And all right, they've all played the same number of holes, but one player may have 2 par 5s left in his 5 holes and might have a much easier finish than somebody else. And I think if they're trying to attract the demographic of people that are new to the game, I'm thinking, if I'm confused watching it, somebody that's grown up with golf, what are they thinking?
No, I agree with you. The
But I
scoreboard.
think that's the TV viewer experience. The people I've talked to that were at the event, particularly the one in Australia, I think the on-course experience is really good. Like all the stuff they've got going on around the event, it's fun. Golf is fun to go and experience and watch a live event. For maybe not the discerning, serious golf fan, it's fun to go and have a few drinks and watch the big screens, listen to the music, and maybe go and see some shots. But it's a very different experience going to a live event than it is going to an Open Championship, for example, and it's never going to be the same.
But as you say with cricket, though, you go to a T20 game, and like if I go and watch Worcester play T20, well, the 100, not the 100, but the T20, that's the kind of thing. I enjoy cricket. I love Test cricket. The Ashes was amazing this summer.
Yeah.
But I think there's room for T20, and I like watching the IPL, and that's why I think there's room for live. I went to the one at Centurion last year just to see what it was going to be like, and with it being the very first one, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good, and I just think there's room for not everybody wants to go to the majors, to the Open Championship, and be told they've got to be quiet all the time and everything. And that's why I think there's room for all this.
Yeah, but I think it's got to evolve, because I'm not sure that the format and the same 48 players at every event, it just gets a little bit. The team thing, I love team golf. We've spent a long time talking about Ryder Cups and Walker Cups, but the team aspect of LIV, it's not team golf, is it?
No, it doesn't work. I mean,
no, it doesn't
work. I agree with you totally. The format is not right yet.
Yeah.
I think if they tweak it a bit and they get some decent, better players, and I just think they've all got to work a bit closer. The majors, so they won't ban things. The world rankings have got to be sorted out. It's like Max Homer said, it's like the world rankings. It's a bit of an eye test. If you look at it, does it look right? Clearly, it doesn't look right at the moment. Johnson, whatever position he is.
Yeah, but there's not many LIV players that are missing from that top 20, 30 in the world. If you ask me, there are one or two. You got, Cam Smith, Bryson, DJ, Taylor Gooch maybe on current form, but I don't know. Other than that, are there any others there that should be in the top 50? Patrick Reed, maybe.
Pat Reed, I think.
The young guys, Joaquin Niemann, and he was, a top 20 player in the world when he went to LIV.
Yeah. So, but again, it'll be interesting this time next year to see where LIV is. It'll be interesting to see next year Aberg, how he's been doing, and it all evolves. And the big thing, the really interesting point to me will be, has there been a merger between the PGA Tour, the DP World Tour, and the PIF, and will Jay Monahan and Keith Pelley be running the tours?
Yeah, I can't see a merger anytime soon. I think the so-called strategic alliance between the DP World Tour and the PGA Tour it's got some good things. We could talk for another hour about that alone, I guess, but it's got some good things. There's certainly benefits for DP World Tour players. The fact that the 10 DP World Tour players that earn a PGA Tour card, they're probably not going to get in those elevated events. So it's going to be tough to keep a PGA Tour card. And then my question as a manager of DP World Tour players was, well, what happens if they go try play the PGA Tour and don't keep their card? But they got that protected category where in the following year they would go in right behind the tournament winners and above that top 115 category. So you're going to get a category back on the DP World Tour where you can play in everything, all the Rolex events and everything. So you're protected back in Europe if you go and try and play for a year on the PGA Tour. And I think that's just that's a no-lose opportunity, isn't it, really?
Keith Pelley said the European Tour or DP World Tour is not a feeder tour to the PGA Tour.
Yeah, but it always has been. But it always has been.
I agree. But why not just say we are? You know, we do we put on great events, but everybody wants to play on the PGA Tour. The guys you look
Yeah.
after, every young golfer wants to play on the PGA Tour.
Well, every young athlete in any sport aspires to play at the highest possible level, and there's no question that that's the PGA Tour. It always has been.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So, but anyway, we could go on talking about all
We
sorts.
could.
But so, just wrapping up,
could.
thank you very much for coming on. It's been really interesting, your views and everything, and a bit more neutral now that you're, doing your own thing and everything.
Yes,
And,
yeah, that's right. No, thanks for having me. It's been quite esteemed company. I've listened to a bunch of these podcasts, and from like David Ledbetter and Chubby. I'm quite honoured to have been invited.
Well, I don't know about that, mate, to be honest. But anyways, thanks a lot for coming on. Anyway, it's been really good, and really looking forward to the Ryder Cup, and we'll catch up soon.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Jeremy.
All right, thanks.